Okay, so this is a great story. Now, maybe you've heard about the Project Veritas. Now, Project Veritas, I've not been a fan of because they did deceptive journalism, and they got that. Now I can't. Acorn,
Yes.
which was a government program to help poor people, and they made it look like this nefarious thing, and it was garbage. But what's really garbage was the people in government who bend to that kind of shit. And what that revealed is the nutless wonders that populate the Democratic Party and the left, the so-called left in America. So what's happening now is the FBI is raided the Project Veritas concern, and this is from the Freedom of the Press Foundation, says this is concerning for press freedom. So I'm going to tell you what happened in this story, and it shows again the New York Times to be completely exactly the piece of shit they claim Project Veritas is. Now, is Project Veritas, do they have a sketchy history? I just told you they do. Yes, and where they tried to make things seem like they weren't. Yes, they did that. But here, even the Freedom of the Press Foundation says it's very concerning what the FBI is doing raiding Project Veritas. I'll tell you what happened. I'm going to tell you what happened. But the real story here has to do with the New York Times collusion with the FBI. Here we go. The FBI raided the homes of Project Veritas founder James O'Keefe and two of his associates earlier this month in connection with an investigation into a diary reported to be stolen from President Biden's daughter, Ashley. Excerpts from the diary were published by another outlet to little notice in the run-up to last November's election. Oh, is this? Yes. Based on the available information, this raid is a troubling development for... Wait a minute. Yes, that the potential story was not a blockbuster public interest investigation, and that O'Keefe and Project Veritas have a long history of deception and manipulation do not change that fact. So based on the available information, this raid is a troubling development for press freedom, even if Project Veritas and James O'Keefe are nefarious MFers. That's what they're saying, right? And so what was the story? Well, Project Veritas and the line between journalism. So on the 12th of November, hang on. Yes. On the 12th of November, the New York Times published this story about James O'Keefe and Project Veritas. And wait till you see this. It says, the headline is Project Veritas and the line between journalism and political spying. And by the way, the fact that O'Keefe over here has a long history of deceit and manipulation does not change how troubling this is. No, it doesn't, because the entire press has a history of deceit and manipulation, and now you're all in danger, except for Rachel Maddow, because the court ruled that she just tells sparkly stories. You remember that? Rachel Maddow is not considered news, according to a court. So why is it only that Project Veritas is considered? They are sketchy. Also, MSNBC, CNN, and the New York Times, very sketchy. They deceive and manipulate all the time. In fact, I'm going to show you how they deceive and manipulate you in this story about Project Veritas. Watch this. So there's the headline. It says, documents show how the conservative group worked with lawyers to gauge how far its deceptive reporting practices could go before running afoul of federal laws. You know, another way to say that is they consulted with a lawyer to make sure everything they were doing was legal. That's another way to say that. But do you see the way they said it? So do you see what words and framing, just like Noam Chomsky says, the facts are in there, but you have to take the New York Times and tilt it sideways and shake it around, and you have to look at it this way, and then you know exactly what the story is. But you'll never know what this actual story is just by reading it off the text. Just on its surface level, this is, again, misleading and deceptive. The New York Times is being misleading and deceptive while claiming and charging Project Veritas for being misleading and deceptive. That's what they're doing. So here we go. The FBI last week searched the homes of, now, this is the article that the New York Times ran on the 12th. It says the FBI last week searched the homes of Mr. O'Keefe and two former Project Veritas operatives, Eric Cochran and Spencer Meads, as part of the investigation into the reported theft of Ms. Biden's diary. The FBI is investigating Ashley Biden's stolen diary. Are we sure? Maybe is that going to be enough people investigating it, the FBI? Maybe we need to get a couple other intelligence agencies involved. Make sure they communicate together. This could be the 9/11 of diary-based terrorism. Let's not take any chances. Maybe get Liam Neeson involved in this. Wouldn't that be a great movie? Taken 4. This time it's his daughter's diary. I wonder what kind of bombshells were included in Ashley's diary. Oh, yeah, it was already reported on last November, and nobody gave a shit about it. Can't wait for the FBI guys to retire and write a best-selling book on breaking the case of their careers over Ashley Biden's diary. So, Mr. Calley, which is the lawyer for Project Veritas, he said that Project Veritas had paid for... So there's this diary. It's believed to be Joe Biden's daughter Ashley's diary, and it came into the possession of Project Veritas. How that happened, we don't know. But we do know that Project Veritas could not verify that that was an authentic diary, and they gave it to the FBI. So James O'Keefe and Project Veritas gave this diary that they came into possession of. They gave it to the FBI because here, I'll show you. Mr. Cowley, that's the lawyer for Project Veritas, said that they had paid for the right to publish the diary, but was unable to confirm it belonged to Ms. Biden, and ultimately decided not to go ahead with the story about its contents, about the contents in the diary. So Project Veritas decided not to go with the story. Excerpts from the diary were later published by another conservative website. So somebody leaked some pages from the diary to these people here at the National File. And so they ran this story that no one paid attention to. It said, full release, Ashley Biden diary reveals child sex trauma, drug abuse, resentment for Joe. They call it as a whistleblower. Okay. Project Veritas. So this is how the New York Times reports this story. Listen to this. So Project Veritas has long occupied a gray area between investigative journalism and political spying. What the fuck? Project Veritas has long occupied that gray area between journalism and Rachel Maddow. How about that? You want to put it that way? Hey, revealing things that powerful people don't want people to know, that's not journalism, I guess. That's political spying now. They're calling it political spying. You know, the word they just made up because they don't do actual journalism anymore? That's what the New York Times is calling it. So here we go. Project Veritas has long occupied a gray area between investigative journalism and political spying. And internal documents obtained by the New York Times. You know what those internal documents are that was obtained by the New York Times? Are you ready for this? The internal documents, meaning internal Project Veritas documents, you know what they were? They were advice. They were protected, confidential communications between Project Veritas and their lawyer giving them legal advice. That's the documents that they obtained. And how did they obtain them? A lot of people are speculating, because it makes sense, that the FBI, when they raided their Project Veritas, they got these internal documents, meaning the protected communications between Project Veritas and their lawyer. The FBI got it when they raided, and then they leaked it to the New York Times so the New York Times could write this story. That's the story. That's the story here. That the FBI is raiding journalists, people who they don't like, and then they're leaking stuff, private communiques between lawyers and clients, to the New York Times to print. That's the speculation. No, where else would they have gotten this from if they didn't get it from the FBI? So that's a credible speculation. And that, to me, is the story. When are the New York Times going to tell us where they got these internal documents? You mean the private communication between the private lawyer and private client? That's called confidential. So the internal documents obtained by the New York Times reveal the extent to which the group has worked with its lawyers to gauge how far its deceptive reporting practices can go before running afoul of federal laws. Another way to write that is they consulted a lawyer to make sure their reporting was legal. Do you see how they're wording it? The most shadiest bullshit way, propagandist narrative forming way possible. So what these documents reveal is that Project Veritas had consulted lawyers to make sure they weren't breaking the law. But they make it seem like that was some kind of nefarious, underhanded, sneaky thing to do. No, that's what you're supposed to do. That's kind of amazing. Okay. The documents, a series of memos written by the group's lawyers. So the documents, meaning the protected communications between a lawyer and their client, those are the documents they're talking about that the New York Times got. People are speculating from the FBI, which that to me is the story. Those documents details ways for Project Veritas sting operations, which typically diverge from standard journalistic practice. Oh my God, they're diverting from standard journalistic practice? Oh, they're guilty of using techniques that are outside the boundaries of mainstream journalism. That's almost as bad as crossing state lines. Thank God the FBI is enforcing mainstream boundaries. Their operations typically diverge from standard journalistic practice by employing people who mask their real identities or create fake ones to infiltrate target organizations to avoid breaking federal So do you see how they did this sentence? Let me show you how they did this sentence. It starts off, I'm going to read you the sentence without this middle part, which this is the propaganda part. So the documents, a series of memos written by the group's lawyer, detail ways for Project Veritas sting operations to avoid breaking federal statutes, such as the law against lying to government officials. That's what they were doing. They were making sure they weren't breaking laws. According to the documents, that's what they were doing. But do you see how they wrote that? To make it seem like they were doing underhanded, nefarious shit that was somehow outside of the bounds of law. What they were actually doing was making sure what they were doing was inside the bounds of law. But the New York Times wants you to have the exact opposite opinion of what happened. This is like the reporting of the Rittenhouse case. That's why everybody was shocked. They're like, what? The mainstream news media told me the exact opposite story. This is exactly what they're doing too. Now, again, I'm no fan of Project Veritas, but this was the New York Times doing the exact thing they're accusing Project Veritas of doing. Okay. Mr. O'Keefe said the FBI took his phones, which had confidential donor and source information. He said that neither he nor his group had done anything wrong and that the FBI searches were an assault on the First Amendment. It seems like they are. It seems like they are an assault on the First Amendment. And I'm going to show you later that Free Speech Project thinks so too. Most news organizations, this is from the New York Times. They say most news organizations consult regularly with lawyers. Then why are you making it seem like it's nefarious shit that the Project Veritas did? Well, what they did, everybody does. But some of Project Veritas's questions for its legal team demonstrate an interest in using tactics that test the boundaries of legality and are outside of mainstream reporting techniques. What the fuck? But this is stunning. what they're doing. These guys are outside the boundaries of mainstream news techniques. Was it legal? Yes, they're making sure the data was legal. But they are outside the bounds of mainstream press. Well, the mainstream press sucks. I'm outside the bounds of it too. Do you see what they're doing? So they did exactly what we do and every other news organization does to make sure they were doing things legally. But look how I'm going to make it seem like they were doing something fucking wrong anyway. The document discussed the perils of the Espionage Act at length. The document. So again, the thing the FBI allegedly gave to the New York Times after they raided Project Veritas, their private communications between their lawyer and Project Veritas. That's the document they're talking about. So the private communications between Project Veritas and their lawyer discussed the perils of the Espionage Act and warned that Project Veritas should not try to obtain or publish any information related to national security. Oh my God. They warned them to not do that? In addition, as more facts and developments occur in these investigations, further legal consultation is advised, the memo stated. This is their gotcha. Their lawyer was advising them not to do illegal shit. This is their gotcha. In another legal document, one about attending campaign events where the Secret Service vets attendees, the group was told its operatives could not use phony names or false pretenses. So Project Veritas wanted to gain access so they could do some reporting, right? At some event. They wanted to see, could we fake our names and sneak back there and see what's going on? And their lawyer said, no, you can't do that at a Secret Service event. You can't do that. And they're like, okay, thanks for the advice. We won't do it. But they're trying to make this all seem nefarious and illegal when it's the exact opposite. They're trying to make sure they're not breaking the law, according to the documents. This is the quote from the lawyer, from Project Veritas' lawyer that the New York Times printed. I believe going backstage or to closed events that require identification to the Secret Service is an invitation for a 1001 charge, the memo said, referring to the federal law against lying to government officials. So they're being told by their lawyer, no, you can't do this technique. Don't do it. That seems smart. That you would ask a lawyer, should we do this? And they say, no, okay, we won't do it. But they're trying to make it look like, oh, see? If the lawyer would. So here's where here's the rest of the story, right? In 2017, Project Veritas began airing undercover footage of the New York Times employees in undercover footage of New York Times employees in a series called American Pravda. In one case, the New York Times editor in London was secretly recorded by two operatives. Is that illegal? That's a powerful person. The New York Times editor in London, that's a powerful person. The documents show that Project Veritas sought legal advice from a lawyer in London about conducting that undercover investigation using covert recording of audio and video. And you see how they make that seem nefarious? And guess what their legal advice was? The lawyer said there was no problem using a fake name and said that proposed operation would most likely be lawful in England and Wales. So they didn't break any laws. It's okay to do that over there. What? And so this is their bombshell. A lawyer told them they could do it. It's legal. So they did it. And when a lawyer told them they couldn't, they didn't do it. This is their New York Times bombshell. The Times provided copies of some of the legal memos to Bill Gruskin, a professor. So the New York Times takes those private messages that allege they got from the FBI, which that's the story, those confidential communiques between Project Veritas's lawyers and Project Veritas, and they gave it to a Columbia School journalism professor. And he's a former deputy manager at the Wall Street Journal, and he was a executive editor at Bloomberg News. So they gave him these. They go and they asked him. So this guy has written about Project Veritas before, Gruskin, so he's familiar with them. And he said that some of Mr. Barr's memos from the lawyer from Project Veritas, some of the memos provided pretty good advice. Particularly about when it is permitted to record phone conversations and other tactical recommendations. So again, this is the New York Times. Again, they're going to bury this down in the story, knowing you won't get to this part. But watch how they also try to spin this. Every newsroom I've ever worked in has basically said undercover journalism was unacceptable. I've never had a reporter tell me he wanted to pose as somebody they were not. Really? So if you wanted to pose as a prisoner to tell what the conditions are in a prison, that would be bad? Or you wanted to go undercover at a meatpacking place or some kind of factory farm, you wanted to expose that would also be bad? That kind of stuff. So that's undercover journalism, that's bad. Okay. That's what, now you know why. I don't know. The judge tries to block. So guess what? So Project Veritas is in the process of suing the New York Times for defamation for a story they did on them. So the judge presiding over that case found out that the New York Times obtained these communications between Project Veritas and their lawyer. That and New York Times told them, stop reporting on this. I mean, the judge told the New York Times, stop reporting on this. Now, I don't know why the judge specifically said that. I think it's because he thinks it might prejudice this case. I don't know. But here's how the New York Times is reporting this. Again, the story to me is, where the fuck did the New York Times get those private communications from? And as speculated, and if it came from the FBI, that's the story. So the judge tries to block New York Times coverage of Project Veritas. The state court order, which the Times said it would immediately oppose, raised concerns from First Amendment advocates. But no First Amendment concerns over the FBI raiding Project Veritas and then allegedly leaking private conversations with their lawyer to the New York Times. That's not a problem for the First Amendment? No, not for the New York Times. In a November 11th article, about the Justice Department investigation, the Times published excerpts from the memos prepared by a lawyer for Project. Oh, so that was November 11th. I kept saying November 12th. It was November 11th. Which elucidated ways for the group to engage in deceptive reporting practice. So now this is the updated story that the New York Times did yesterday on this situation. So in a November 11th article about the Justice Department investigation, the New York Times published excerpts from memos prepared by a lawyer for Project Veritas. So that was their private communications between their lawyer and Project Veritas, which elucidated ways for the group to engage in deceptive reporting practices like creating fake identities while avoiding any breach of federal law, meaning doing stuff that is legal. Again, they want to know how we can do this without breaking a law. But do you see how the Times keeps framing this as they're doing illegal shit, even though the documents they received show that they're trying to make sure they don't break any laws. This is quite. Hang on, one more thing. Hang on, hold on. Okay. But on Wednesday, Project Veritas filed a motion arguing that the Times had breached its right to attorney-client privilege by disseminating the memos and accused the paper of trying to embarrass a litigation opponent. Along with the written excerpts, images of the memos. Oh, so this is the New York Times. They then put those private communications between their lawyers, they put them up at their website, but then they apologize. Oh, that was just a mistake. It says they were briefly posted on November 11th on the Times website. A Times spokeswoman said that this was inadvertent.
Oh, come on.
And that the images were removed after editors discovered the mistake. What mistake? Who did it? What do you mean? How did that happen? We'll never know. On Thursday, the trial court judge, Charles D. Wood of State Supreme Court in Westchester County, ordered that the Times immediately sequester, protect, and refrain from disseminating any of the materials prepared by the Project Veritas lawyer. So there you go. So that judge is saying, we're going to put the gag order on you. You can't report on any more of those private conversations between Project Veritas and their lawyers. That's what the judge said. Furthermore, Justice Wood instructed the Times to cease further efforts to solicit or acquire those materials, effectively preventing the newspaper from reporting on the matter. So I would love to hear an interview with this judge to see what the thinking was on that. So basically, the New York Times can't violate attorney-client privilege is what I think that judge is saying. Now they work for the government as the mainstream boundary police. They have to follow cop rules. So this is the story. So now there's a gag order on the New York Times, and everybody's losing their shit that this is an assault on freedom of speech. Not the FBI breaking into the Veritas's doing a search and then allegedly leaking private lawyer confidential conversations to the New York Times, who Project Veritas has a fucking lawsuit against. That's not a threat to the First Amendment or freedom of the press. It's the judge saying, hey, stop reporting on that stuff that you probably got from the FBI wrong. Stop doing that. So now I'm going to go back. To this article by the Freedom of the Press Foundation. And they're going to explain to you why the FBI raiding Project Veritas is a threat to everybody. And the New York Times is spinning it the exact opposite way. The exact opposite way. The New York Times wants you to think that they're the good guys and so is the FBI in this, when they're not. For good reason, neither the First Amendment nor the Privacy Protection Act, the little-known but vital law that sets a very high bar for searches and seizures in cases that may touch on press freedom, create a special class. So, for good reason, neither the First Amendment nor the Privacy Protection Act create a special class of journalists entitled to rights beyond ordinary citizens. So there is no special class of journalists inside the First Amendment. That's what that's saying. There is no special class. Everybody gets to exercise the First Amendment just like a journalist. Instead, everyone is very broadly understood to have the legal right to engage in acts of journalism. The PPA, in fact, doesn't explicitly mention or define journalists at all. The law protects work products of any person reasonably believed to have a purpose to disseminate to the public a newspaper, book, broadcast, or other similar form of public communication. So anybody can use the protection of the First Amendment that journalists use. The benefits of this approach are that the government cannot deny the protection of law to political adversaries, or those who would publish embarrassing or challenging facts about people or institutions in power, or jail or part-time independent journalists for engaging in acts that journalists at the New York Times engage in regularly. At least in theory, the mechanisms of law enforcement cannot be legally used to intimidate targets who are not doing the right kind of journalism in the eyes of the government officials. So in theory, it's supposed to protect you from targeted harassment from the government when you're doing journalism or using the First Amendment. And indeed, much of the brave journalism that we celebrate, the kind that speaks truth to power and affects real change in the public interest, relies on those protections. The trade-off to broad free speech rights, of course, is that people may speak in ways that are odious or deceitful, or engage in journalism which reasonably can be interpreted as unethical, even when it breaks no law. But any system designed to diminish those rights for known bad actors is a system that could be abused to silence speech and can be turned on those who engage in acts of journalism that we consider noble and just. So they're saying you can't do this because, of course, it's going to be used against you or someone else doing good work. That's why you got to have freedom of speech. Whether we or anyone for that matter consider O'Keefe and Project Veritas to be journalists is besides the point. If, in this particular case, they were engaged in acts of journalism, receiving information from a source and looking into whether they should publish it, the case may have serious implications for press freedom. This is why, in addition to Freedom of the Press Foundation, organizations like the ACLU and the Committee to Protect Journalists have also issued statements expressing deep concern over the matter. None of those deep concerns were reflected in either of those New York Times articles about this situation. Isn't that interesting? They're so considered, there's New York Times so concerned with press freedom. Okay, so again, even the ACLU is doing what they're supposed to do in this, and that's how serious this is. Even the shit libs over at the ACLU, who completely lost their way during the Trump era, even they are getting this right. For all you kids who don't know, the ACLU is an advocacy group that was founded in the 1920s. Okay. For the past decade, under administrations that span both parties, the Justice Department has infringed on the rights of many mainstream and independent journalists, often in secret. From engaging in invasive surveillance to prosecuting their sources, and to this day attempting to criminalize important aspects of the news-gathering process. Perhaps there's reason not to trust as fact O'Keefe's sworn statement to the court that the diary was legally obtained, given his organization's history of deception, but we are not about to take the Justice Department's word for it either, when they have not released any evidence at all that shows O'Keefe or his employees broke the law. Isn't it weird that they wouldn't leak that information to the New York Times, but allegedly they would leak their private communiques with Project Veritas's lawyers to the New York Times? If the Department of Justice does have probable cause evidence that O'Keefe or Project Veritas were directly involved in the theft of the diary, then our concerns would be alleviated. But unless and until the Department of Justice releases such evidence, this episode will remain very worrying from a press freedom perspective. So that's the story. So I don't know what you think about the Project Veritas story, because if you're getting it from the New York Times, you wouldn't know anything about it almost. And you wouldn't know that the New York Times is just as nefarious as the Project Veritas. So I don't think there's any good guys in this story. And so they just handed this story to me on a platter. I couldn't believe it when I started reading the New York Times version of this story, how ridiculous it was and how it didn't mention the real threat to press freedoms being the FBI raiding journalists' offices and then allegedly leaking private communiques between their lawyers to the New York Times. Nowhere did they. Isn't that something that the New York Times doesn't see this, but the ACLU does, and the Freedom of the Press Foundation does? Isn't that interesting? But not the New York Times. I wonder why. Maybe because the New York Times is an establishment, billionaire-owned, funded by Big Pharma and the military-industrial complex and all that shit. So now you know the whole story. Now you know it's the FBI up to nefarious stuff in this case. Unless they tell it, why wouldn't they leak the real story? And the New York Times completely misframing the story. Isn't that to me, that's hilarious. Hey, come see us do a live stand-up show in Portland, Oregon, the 26th and 27th of November. That's Thanksgiving weekend. See you there. And please join our premium program. Get a lot of extra stuff. We'll talk to you later.